The boy was standing in a river, forging a sword. Around him, the city was on fire. Military jets screamed low overhead, their engines shaking the water into white foam. Something vast and black circled above the downtown towers. A creature pulled from a nightmare, wings spread wide enough to blot out the moon. And in the middle of all of it, a 17-year-old boy who looked like he belonged in a classroom was ankle-deep in the current, hammering a blade on a river stone, working with the calm focus of someone who had done this 10,000 times before, because he had. Lin Mo had forged swords in the burning ruins of kingdoms. He had hammered steel on mountaintops while lightning split the sky around him. He had once reforged a sacred blade at the center of a dying star, with the screams of an entire demon army at his back. But those memories belonged to a different body, a different world, a different life. In this one, he was just a fat high school boy who everyone thought was a little pathetic. Rewind. 2 days after he opened his eyes in this new body, Lin Mo sat on the edge of a bed that was not his, and read the news on a phone that was not his, and understood, slowly and with great displeasure, that something had gone terribly wrong with his death. He was supposed to have died cleanly, a last technique, a final detonation of everything he had left, taking the Demon Queen with him at the boundary between worlds. He had been prepared for it, at peace with it even, or as close to peace as he had ever allowed himself. Instead, he was here. The news on the phone was bewildering. Women dominated every headline. Generals, surgeons, athletes, executives. Men appeared occasionally, usually in domestic contexts, usually in soft lighting, usually smiling. Lin Mo read 3 articles in a row before the pattern solidified in his mind. This world had inverted the roles he understood. Women ruled it, men existed quietly on the margins, expected to cook and clean and look pleasant and say little. He looked at the body he currently occupied. Overweight, soft, slow, he could feel the absence of cultivation like a man feels a missing limb, a constant phantom ache where immense power used to live. His spiritual foundation was almost completely gone. What remained was a thin thread, barely enough to light a candle. He was an immortal emperor who had spent 10,000 years cultivating god-level power. He currently could not run up a single flight of stairs without his lungs burning. Lin Mo set the phone down. He folded his hands in his lap with the habitual precision of someone who had once stilled battlefields by standing quietly. He thought about his situation with the same cold assessment he had applied to every war, every impossible campaign, every enemy who had ever believed him finished. Then he got up and went to look for food. The family that owned this body, his body now, was not warm. That became clear over the first dinner. The dining room was clean and well furnished. His aunt sat at the head of the table, a thin woman with sharp eyes and the satisfied expression of someone who considers herself essential. His cousin, a broad-shouldered young man his own age, louder than he needed to be, kicked his shin under the table within the first 2 minutes and grinned about it. His uncle sat beside the aunt, doing whatever his aunt's expression told him to do. And his grandmother sat at the far end of the table, staring at nothing, her rice bowl untouched. The old woman's mind had slipped away from her. Dementia, the hospital files said. What remained of her appeared in brief flashes, a blink too sharp to be absent, a slight turn of the head at the wrong moment. Lin Mo noticed those moments. He filed them. The aunt placed a bowl in front of him with the attitude of someone granting a favor. She explained, in the smooth tone of someone who had rehearsed this, that the family home was now being managed under her supervision. That Lin Mo's parents' assets had been placed in a trust she administered. That his monthly allowance would be modest but sufficient for his needs, given that he was still in school and not yet contributing. Lin Mo ate his rice. His cousin knocked a chopstick off the table onto his lap and snorted. Lin Mo picked it up and set it aside. The aunt said that she expected him to be grateful, to behave himself, to cause no embarrassment to the family. Lin Mo finished his rice. He asked, politely, for a second portion. The cousin made a sound about his weight. The aunt said nothing to stop it. Outside, somewhere in the neighborhood, a car alarm went off and then fell silent. Lin Mo sat at that table, an emperor who had once made a demon queen kneel, a man who had rewritten the laws of cultivation through sheer force of will, and he ate his rice and said nothing and thought about how long he was willing to let this last. Not very long, but now was not the time. School arrived with its own cruelties, smaller and sharper. He had been enrolled before he arrived in this body, so there were no administrative delays. just the morning walk through gates that were already filling with students. Female students primarily, moving with the loud confidence of people in their natural habitat. The boys existed at a different register, quieter, clustered. Some of them watched Lin Mo pass with a sympathy he recognized as solidarity between the dismissed. He found his classroom, located a seat near the back, and sat down to observe. The teacher was a woman. The class representatives were women. The two boys who held minor roles in the class structure spent most of their time agreeing enthusiastically with whatever the girls proposed. Lin Mo made a mental map of the social terrain with the practiced speed of someone who had once had to read entire courts in a single evening without making an enemy. That was when he heard the laughter. It was not directed at him yet, it was already ongoing. A low current of mockery aimed at someone else in the corner. Something about shoes, but the quality of it told him immediately who held the room and who was held at its mercy. He noted it and returned his attention to the window. What he needed to know right now had nothing to do with school hierarchies. He needed to know whether cultivators existed in this world. He needed to know whether the Demon Queen had followed him through the boundary. And he needed to find a way to rebuild his cultivation before anyone in any faction figured out what was sitting in this overweight high school body. The answer to the first question arrived that same afternoon, worn around a girl's neck. She was sitting across the classroom, sharp-featured, blonde hair, moving with the casual authority of someone accustomed to being noticed. Lin Mo would have dismissed her entirely, except for the small pendant at her throat. Jade, on a red cord, ordinary-looking, except that it carried a trace of spiritual aura, faint, like smoke from a fire that had gone out hours ago, but unmistakable to someone who had spent 10,000 years immersed in cultivation energy. Lin Mo's eyes tracked to it for exactly 1 second before he looked away. So cultivators existed here, hidden, scarce, but real. The girl's name was Zhao Yutong. He learned this from the boy beside him, who offered the information with the conspiratorial energy of someone explaining which pots were hot in a kitchen. She was from one of the 3 great families in this city. Her family hunted something, demonic threats, the boy said vaguely, not quite sure of the details himself, and she was, apparently, the type of person who found it amusing to make someone's day significantly worse if the mood struck her. The mood struck her that afternoon. Lin Mo never learned the exact reason she chose him as her target, possibly because he was the only person in the room who hadn't instinctively looked deferential when she passed. She walked over, looked at him with the specific calm of someone about to enjoy themselves, and asked him whether he was playing a video game. He was. He had pulled up a strategy title on his phone, a war game, turn-based, the kind that required reading troop movements and resource allocation. He had picked it up in 2 days of evening practice and had found it almost insultingly simple compared to the actual wars he had run, but it passed the time. She said she played that game. She said she was ranked first in the school. She said if he wanted to understand how it actually worked, she could show him. The dozen girls hovering at her shoulder laughed. Lin Mo put his phone away. He said that would be interesting. The rematch happened privately, a few days later. Yutong, who had made the offer assuming an easy demonstration, faced Lin Mo across the board and found something she did not know how to name. He moved without hesitation. Every resource allocation was optimized. When she flanked left, a maneuver she used to close out every match, he had already prepared a counter 3 turns before. When she tried to read his pattern, the pattern had already shifted. He was not playing the game's strategies. He was playing hers, and he was staying 2 engagements ahead. The final score was 47-0 in his favor. Yutong stared at the screen for a moment. Then she asked who he was. He said his name was Lin Mo. She said she knew his name. She was asking something else. He offered no answer. He handed the phone back and left. She watched him go with an expression that had something in it she did not quite recognize. Not quite anger, not quite admiration. Something unsettled sitting between them. 2 things happened in the same week that shifted the shape of the story. The first, his arranged fiancée arrived. Yan Hui was not cruel in the way the aunt was. The aunt operated from calculation. Yan Hui was cruel in the way of the young and certain, someone who had arranged her beliefs about the world into a neat structure and had no patience for anything that complicated them. She arrived at the school with her parents and several mutual acquaintances from families who had known Lin Mo's parents, and she looked at him once, openly, from head to foot, and announced, with a regret that sounded practiced, that she did not think the engagement was workable. The crowd that had gathered, because crowds always gathered for this, waited for his reaction. He had none that they could read. He stood there with his hands in his pockets and looked back at her with the level patience of someone who had survived 10,000 years of people telling him what he couldn't do. She said something about compatibility, about expectations, about the kind of man she hoped to be with. He said nothing. She said she hoped he wouldn't take it personally. He said he wouldn't. The crowd exchanged looks. His aunt, somewhere at the back, made a noise between sympathy and satisfaction. What no one in that courtyard knew, what none of them had any way of knowing, was that the boy they were looking at had once been worshipped as a god, that kingdoms had rebuilt themselves around his decisions, that the woman standing in front of him, in the life he had actually lived, would not have been allowed to stand within 50 meters of him without a formal invitation. He turned and walked back toward the school building. The crowd watched him go. The second thing, he met her on a rooftop. He had gone up to the school roof to think, away from people, closer to sky, where the ambient spiritual energy was marginally higher. He had developed a habit of sitting with his back against the water tower housing and running his mind over the small problems of each day, the way he used to run his mind over campaign maps. It was quieter up there. He was not expecting company. The girl who dropped through the stairwell door was not Yutong. She was the one from the board game rivalry, the girl people called Han in their year, who had a way of watching a room without appearing to watch it. She moved carefully, clearly in pain, her left hand pressed to her ribs. She made it 3 steps onto the roof before her leg gave slightly and she stopped. She heard him behind her. She turned. There was a long pause. Lin Mo looked at her. She looked at him. He could see she had already calculated several ways this could go wrong for her. Someone seeing her. Someone asking questions she did not want to answer. He crossed the roof and pressed 2 fingers lightly to her side, through her jacket. He could feel the fracture through the fabric and a thin thread of his own depleted spiritual energy. Clean break. Recent. He asked how she had done it. She said she had fallen. He did not believe her, and she could tell that. But she held his gaze without flinching. He went to the supply closet at the top of the stairs, found a first aid kit, and came back. He wrapped her ribs with the professional efficiency of someone who had dressed battlefield wounds for centuries. When he was done, he took off his jacket, an old thing, too large for him, and held it out. She looked at it. She looked at him. A very slight shift moved through her face, too fast to name. She took the jacket. Neither of them said anything else. She left first. He stood on the roof for a while afterward, looking at the city's skyline, thinking about what he had just sensed in the few seconds his fingers had pressed against her side. Something deep, ancient, wrong in the way that only one type of person could be wrong, like finding a wolf in the house when you knew you had locked the gate. He filed that too. The confrontation with his cousin and uncle happened on a Thursday. The aunt had decided, through some internal logic that she did not bother explaining to Lin Mo, that his allowance would be suspended until further notice. The cousin announced this at the breakfast table, with the grin of someone delivering bad news they personally enjoyed. When Lin Mo asked the aunt directly, she explained it as a financial matter, a temporary measure, nothing personal. His uncle added, unnecessarily, that it would teach him to appreciate things. Lin Mo looked at his uncle. Then he picked up his breakfast bowl, finished it, and stood up. What happened next was fast enough that neither the cousin nor the uncle fully processed it until it was over. The cousin stood up to block the doorway. He was larger than Lin Mo, with the confidence of someone who had bullied successfully for years. He reached out and grabbed Lin Mo's arm. Lin Mo caught his wrist, not harshly, not with any dramatic display. He simply applied the minimum pressure required to hold the cousin's hand exactly where it was, and then he kept it there, and the cousin discovered that he could not move it. He pulled. He braced. He put his whole body into it. Nothing. The uncle came forward and grabbed Lin Mo's shoulder. Lin Mo turned slightly, caught that wrist with his other hand, and held both of them. 2 adult men, straining against a hold they could not break. The aunt had gone very still. The cousin's face had passed through shock and arrived somewhere near tears. Lin Mo released them both. He adjusted his jacket. He looked at his aunt. He said he would handle his own finances. He said it plainly, without heat. He said he would not be requiring the allowance, and that if the family had concerns about the estate, they could raise them with a lawyer. He walked out. From the hallway, he could hear his cousin making a sound that was definitely crying. He needed money. That was the immediate problem. He had no job, no connections, no resources the aunt did not control, but he had something worth far more than any of those things. He had 10,000 years of cultivation knowledge, including arts that no one in this world had seen in any living memory. Talismans. In his original world, a master-grade talisman was worth more than a city. The process of crafting them was considered nearly impossible, requiring spiritual precision, refined materials, and a depth of cultivation that most people never reached. He crafted 12 in an evening, using basic supplies from a stationery shop. The dark cultivation network was not difficult to find, once he knew what to look for. Every cultivation world had one, a shadow market running underneath the official channels, moving artifacts and intelligence and services that respectable factions would not acknowledge. He found this one through the pendant trace he had sensed on Yutong. Following that aura signature led him to forums, which led him to channels, which led him to the place where serious buyers and sellers operated under coded handles. He set up an account. He listed the talismans at a price that looked expensive, but was, by any actual standard, insultingly low for what they were. Then he waited. The first inquiry arrived within 2 hours. The buyer, a representative of something called the Phoenix Group, offered to triple his asking price and requested his entire supply. They wanted to know who he was. They wanted to meet. He declined the meeting. He took the money. The talismans, they messaged back, were unlike anything they had seen. Where had he learned to craft these? He did not answer. He took the money and spent most of it on something his cousin and uncle had never considered worth buying, a train ticket and 3 weeks of supplies for a mountain. Wu Mountain was not famous. It was not a sacred cultivation site, not a recognized spirit vein, not listed anywhere in the dark network's geography of power sources. It was simply very high, very cold, and very far from any city. And at that altitude, in that silence, there was ambient spiritual energy. Thin, barely perceptible, like drinking water from a puddle when you had once commanded rivers. But it was real. And Lin Mo was not a man who wasted real things. He climbed for 2 months. The early weeks were humbling in a way that nothing in his previous life had managed. The body resisted. It had spent years building up layers it didn't need and neglecting the muscles underneath. On the 3rd day of climbing, he fell twice. His lungs treated him like an enemy. His joints made noises he did not appreciate. He climbed anyway. Every morning before light, every evening until dark. He built small formations on the rock faces, simple ones, designed to gather and concentrate whatever ambient energy the mountain offered. He sat inside them for hours, breathing with the precision of a man who had once meditated for 3 years without moving from a single stone. The energy that came was thin and slow. He accepted it all. Between formation sessions he moved, every movement precise, economic, retraining the body the way you would retrain a horse that had forgotten what it was for. He ate correctly. He slept correctly. He treated the fat teenager's body like a neglected instrument that could still be made to play. By the 6th week, it had started to listen. By the end of the 8th week, when he came down from the mountain and stepped onto the train platform at the edge of the city, the body that had climbed those hills was not the one that had left. The weight was gone. Every gram of it replaced with something that moved differently, leaner, sharper, with the economical grace of someone whose every motion had been trained down to its minimum necessary arc. The face that looked back at him from the train window had kept its bone structure, but shed everything soft. He adjusted the collar of his jacket. He bought a coffee from a platform vendor. He thought about the formation he had left active on the mountain, still gathering energy, still sending a slow trickle through the link he had maintained. He thought about the dark network, and the money still accumulating from talisman sales, and the girl with the jade pendant, and the girl who had taken his jacket on the rooftop. He thought about 2 months of silence, and how much had probably moved in that silence without him. The train pulled into the city. School had not changed. The corridors, the classrooms, the layered social structures, all of it exactly as he had left it. What had changed was the reaction when he walked through the doors. The silence arrived before he did. It spread from the entrance like a stone dropped in water, moving outward in rings. He kept his pace even. He had walked into courts of 10,000 people and maintained the same pace. He was not going to adjust himself for a school corridor, but he noticed. The girl from his homeroom, one of the ones who had laughed most freely at Yan Hui's rejection, watched him pass with an expression he had seen many times over many centuries. The expression of someone revising an assessment they had thought was finished. Yan Hui herself appeared at the end of the hallway. She saw him. Her face did something complicated. She took 2 steps toward him, stopped, and stood very still. He walked past her without turning his head. He found his seat in the classroom, placed his bag on the hook, and began looking through the 2 months of academic work he had missed. He had obtained a packet of notes from his classmate Song Yunshu, cheerful, chatty, the sort of person whose social usefulness Lin Mo had immediately recognized and cultivated accordingly. Song Yunshu dropped into the seat beside him within 30 seconds of Lin Mo sitting down. He said, quietly, emphatically, with the energy of someone who had been waiting 2 months to say it, that Lin Mo had absolutely destroyed everything. Lin Mo asked him to clarify. Song Yunshu said that half the school was in love with him, that Yan Hui had been making pointed comments about how appearances could change and people should give others more time, and that Yutong had been asking about him no less than 4 times since the start of term. Lin Mo made a note of the Yutong detail and asked Song Yunshu to show him what chapters they had covered in mathematics. Yutong found him at lunch. She sat down across from him with the directness of someone who did not operate through intermediaries. She had the jade pendant on. He could sense it more clearly now that his own cultivation had partially recovered. She put her tray down and looked at him and said, without preamble, that she had been tracking a demonic presence in the South District, and she needed to know if he had seen anything unusual during the months he was away. He looked at her. She said she wasn't asking for personal reasons. It was a professional matter. He happened to have been out of the city during the relevant period. He said he had been on a mountain. She said she knew. She asked if he had sensed anything before he left. He considered this. He had in fact sensed several things. The dried-out corpses on the farm road he had passed on his first week of climbing, drained of their life energy in a pattern he recognized from his previous life's wars. The kind of drain that came from a cultivator using others as fuel. He had not investigated further at the time because he had been trying not to get involved in anything that would attract attention. He told her he had seen a farm with unusually withered soil and dried crops. He described the location. She wrote it on her phone without looking at the screen. Then she looked up at him with something in her expression that was measuring him in a different way than before. She said that was exactly the kind of thing she needed. She asked if he would tell her if he noticed anything else. He said he would consider it. She left. 3 of her friends, who had been hovering at a calculated distance, descended on her the moment she reached the hallway. He could not hear what they were saying, but the body language was familiar. A court closing in on someone who had just done something potentially interesting. He returned to his food. That evening, he crafted a paper doll. The technique was ancient, one of his first, learned before he had the power to do much else. A small figure, folded from treated paper, linked to his consciousness by a thread of spiritual energy. It could sit in a room, watch a corridor, listen to a conversation. The link gave him its eyes and ears. He placed one under Yutong's chair the following morning, while the classroom was empty. Through the doll's senses, in the evenings and stolen classroom minutes, he began building a picture of what the Phoenix Group actually was and what Yutong was actually doing. She hunted demonic cultivators. Her family was connected to the organization at a high level. Her grandmother held a senior position. They were aware of the same farm he had described, and they were now tracking a formation that had been set up in the South District, a structure designed to drain human spiritual energy and funnel it somewhere. He also learned that someone on the dark network had been buying tracking talismans in bulk. The buyer's pattern, the timing, the specificity, the types of talismans requested, fit someone who was building a large-scale operation, not hunting, setting up. He spent an evening designing something more useful than a tracking talisman, a cultivation compass, capable of mapping spiritual energy flow across a city grid. The design was his own. Nothing like it existed in this world. He priced it accordingly on the dark network, listed it anonymously, and watched 3 bidding wars erupt within the week. Yutong bought one. He confirmed this through the paper doll. She used it within 48 hours and located the formation's center. What happened next, Lin Mo learned partly through the doll and partly through his own inference. The Phoenix Group raided the formation site in the South District on a night when the rain was heavy enough to keep most of the city indoors. Yutong went in with 3 allies, cultivators from her family's network, people she trusted and had fought beside. Lin Mo watched through the doll's sense thread as they entered a building that had bin converted into the formation's anchor point. What they found inside was not what they expected. The formation was not simply draining energy and storing it. It was feeding something, and that something had been expecting visitors. The 3 allies, faces he had seen in the doll's surveillance, people with names and habits and small personal rituals, were turned inside the formation before the group could retreat, not killed outright. Something worse, animated by the formation's energy, kept moving, voices and faces intact but wrong in the way that only a cultivator who had seen corpse techniques would recognize. And they called her name, the dead ones. They called Yutong by name. He felt the violence of that through the doll's feedback even from across the city. Whatever she had to do to get clear of that building, she did it. By the time she made it to the roof, she was badly wounded. Then Hungling arrived. The grandmother was small. She looked, Lin Mo thought, like a child wearing formal clothes. Slight frame, round face, walking cane she clearly did not need. But when she spoke, the demonic cultivator who had been operating the formation stopped moving. Not out of choice. It stopped the way a fire stops when you remove the air from around it. Lin Mo had not seen someone with that level of cultivation in this world yet. He watched through the doll as the demonic cultivator was extracted, the formation dismantled. One artifact came loose in the process, a fragment of a blade, old and dark, humming with the specific frequency of a cursed weapon. He recognized it. He had destroyed the original, once, in a different world. Apparently some part of it had survived the journey. This was becoming complicated. Silent flaw check, scanning for repeated 3+ word phrases, banned crutch phrases, same opener runs, abstract stake telling, vague antagonist, tease overuse. All clear, proceeding. He had not planned to get kidnapped, but he had planned for the possibility. The invitation came through Yan Hui, not directly, because she no longer had the standing to approach him directly after the engagement dissolution. It came through a mutual acquaintance, dressed as a social thing, a gathering, a dinner, nothing important. The sort of event that existed mainly to create the appearance of normality. Lin Mo declined. 2 days later, he woke in a room that was not his own. The hypnosis was technically competent. Someone had delivered it through a third party. A delivery driver, a brief handshake at the school gate, a touch that lasted less than a second. He had felt the moment it activated. A thin pressure behind his eyes, like a finger pressing gently on the back of a lens. He had been walking home. His legs had redirected without his permission. He let them. A former emperor who had spent his life outmaneuvering enemies did not panic at being maneuvered. He went where they were taking him, stayed quiet, kept his breathing regular, and used the time to look at everything around him. The room they brought him to was in a private residence in the North District. He could tell by the traffic noise pattern and the angle of the evening light. 3 guards outside the door. 2 cameras in the room, both visible, which meant there were probably 2 more he could not see. Yan Hui arrived 20 minutes later wearing the expression of someone who had been rehearsing this. She had changed since the engagement dissolution. Not physically. Her face was the same. But there was something moving behind her eyes now that had not been there before. A brightness that was a few degrees off from any brightness that was healthy. She told him she had spent a lot of time thinking about him. She said she had come to understand him better than she had before. She said she wanted him to understand something important. Lin Mo sat and listened and let her talk. He could sense the fragment. It was woven into something she wore at her wrist. A bracelet he hadn't noticed in their previous encounters, probably because it had only recently arrived. The cursed sword fragment he had watched the Phoenix group lose track of at the formation site had apparently found itself a host. The fragment was old and arrogant. It operated on the principle that power recognized power, and it would attach itself to whoever it could use to gather more of its pieces. Yan Hui, whose cultivation was modest but whose emotional state had made her receptive, had been a convenient door. She told him she had a plan. The plan involved him. He waited until she had laid most of it out, then he coughed once and asked her for a glass of water. She blinked. She called for water. In the moment her attention divided, he made a small motion with his left hand. 3 fingers, a specific angle. and activated the tracking mark he had already placed on the room's fourth wall when he had first scanned the space. Yutong would find it within a day. He was confident in that. He drank the water. He agreed to everything Yanhui said. He let her believe the hypnosis was holding. Then he sat back and waited. It was the Demon Queen who arrived first. He did not know her as the Demon Queen yet. Or rather, he had a strong suspicion but not confirmation. He knew her as the girl from the rooftop. Han, the one who had watched him play board games with the cold patience of someone who found the match more interesting than she wanted to admit. The one whose ribs he had wrapped, whose jacket he had given away, whose spiritual aura carried a frequency he had spent 10,000 years learning to recognize. She came through the window, not loudly, not with any announcement. One moment the window was closed, and then it was not, and she was in the room, and Yanhui had taken 3 steps backward before she was even aware she had moved. Han looked at Yanhui with the specific quality of attention that only certain people could produce, the kind that made a room very quiet, very fast. She said, in a voice that was careful and even, that she wanted the bracelet. Yanhui raised her arm. The fragment on the bracelet pulsed. Yanhui's expression shifted into something controlled by something else. What followed was brief. Han was not fighting at full power. Lin Mo could tell that, even through the depleted sensitivity of his current cultivation. She was operating well below whatever her actual ceiling was. But even at reduced capacity, the gap between her and a girl with a borrowed demon fragment was not a contest. Yanhui ended up on the floor, not dead. The bracelet ended up in Han's hand. Han looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at Lin Mo. He was still sitting in the chair. She asked if he had actually been hypnotized. He said the hypnosis had been broken fairly quickly, yes. There was a short silence. She said he could have left at any point. He said he had been curious about what they were planning. She looked at him for 3 more seconds with an expression he could not quite categorize. It occupied a space between assessment and something less professional. Then she turned and walked back to the window. He asked her name. She said he already knew it. He said he knew what she called herself here. He meant the other one. She stopped. Her back was still to him. 1 breath, 2. She left through the window without answering. He sat in the empty room for a moment, then stood, straightened his jacket, and walked out through the front door. The guards had apparently departed at some point during the preceding few minutes. He could not imagine why. Outside, the city had no idea what was coming. Most cities don't, Lin Mo reflected, in the days that followed. They go on producing their ordinary noise, traffic, commerce, the 10,000 small transactions of daily life, right up until the moment something extraordinary tears through the middle of them. He had seen it happen to a dozen cities in his previous life. The ordinary noise right up until the silence. The cursed sword was the problem. A fragment was one thing. Troublesome, limited, the kind of issue a competent cultivator could handle quietly. But fragments sought each other. They were drawn together, piece by piece, the way a broken magnet's halves pull despite the distance. And as they joined, the entity they constituted became something different from any of its pieces. Not just a weapon, but a will. A surviving personality from the original curse, ambitious and hungry and extremely old. The dark network had gone quiet in the past week. The Shadow Clan, which ran the market's infrastructure, had pulled back from several categories of trade. That kind of withdrawal, sudden, unexplained, by a group that prided itself on neutrality, meant someone very serious had made contact. He crafted another paper doll and sent it into the South District. What it brought back 3 days later was enough to confirm what he had suspected. The fragments had assembled, not all of them, but enough. The entity that called itself the Demon Sword was awake, and it was looking for a host powerful enough to carry what it had become. And it had, apparently, been tracking the 2 strongest cultivation signatures in the city with considerable interest. One was Yutong. The Phoenix Group was already aware of this threat and was moving to protect her. The other was the girl from the rooftop. The city battle began on a Tuesday. Lin Mo had always found something faintly absurd about major catastrophes beginning on ordinary weekdays. Wars, he had noticed over 10,000 years, had very little respect for dramatic timing. He was on the river bridge when the sky split. Not metaphorically, literally. A crack appeared in the air above the downtown district, the kind of rupture that happened when something with enough power forced itself between dimensions without the geometry to support the crossing. The sound arrived half a second after the visual, a bass impact that he felt in his chest before he heard it with his ears. Below the crack, something enormous was emerging. He had seen chaos beasts in his previous life. This one was medium scale by those standards, maybe 40 meters at the shoulder, body composed of what looked like compressed dark matter and old bone, moving through buildings with the particular indifference of something that had never encountered anything it needed to step around. The military had scrambled within minutes. Jets overhead, ground vehicles cordoning the district, emergency broadcasts on every frequency. None of that was going to help. He was moving toward the river before he had fully decided to. His cultivation was not at fighting level. The 2 months of mountain training had rebuilt his physical foundation, and his continued talisman work had recovered perhaps 8% of his full spiritual depth. Enough to operate, not enough to face what was in that sky. He knew this. He ran his options against it, the way he had always run numbers against an unfavorable battlefield, and found the same answer every time. He had to fight with what he had and get creative about the rest. The river was cold and moving fast. He waded into his shins, reached down, and found a length of iron rebar half buried in the silt. Construction debris, probably years old. He pulled it free and held it in both hands. What he needed was not a weapon. He had those. What he needed was a focus, a physical anchor for the sword technique he was about to attempt, which required a blade, preferably one he had forged himself, ideally one with a cultivation signature already baked into the metal. He had none of those things. He had a piece of rebar and a river, and above him, an open sky that was giving him the exact weather pattern he needed. Lightning building in the clouds to the north, drawn in by the Chaos Beast's energy, producing the electromagnetic conditions that old forge masters had called the dragon's breath. He started hitting the rebar on a flat river stone. It was not elegant. It was the least elegant forging he had ever done in 10,000 years, and he had once forged a divine blade during an active avalanche. He used the river current to cool each strike, rotated the metal the way the technique required, and poured the thin thread of his remaining spiritual energy into each impact, sealing the cultivation signature into the iron molecule by molecule. Above him, the jets were making runs at the Chaos Beast and accomplishing nothing. Above him, somewhere in the smoke and broken skyline, the demon sword was circling. He kept hammering. The demon queen was already fighting. He could track her energy signature through the chaos. She was moving through the battle zone at a level that should have been impossible for anyone in this world, burning through techniques that he recognized from their previous life's encounters. She was trying to contain the demon sword without revealing the full depth of her power, and it was costing her. She was also buying him time, possibly without knowing that was what she was doing. He had 40% of what he needed. He had 50. He sent the paper doll he kept on his person up into the air as a decoy, a technique that required almost nothing to maintain but drew spiritual attention toward itself, like a lit match in a dark room. The demon sword registered it. Diverted. Han registered it too. Through some sense he had not expected her to maintain at this range, and adjusted her approach. The sword in his hands was not sacred. It was not beautiful. It was a piece of construction iron with a cultivation signature, hammered into it by an emperor operating at 8% of his capacity, shaped by river water and a rock, and it would have embarrassed him to show it to anyone who had ever seen real divine weaponry. He completed the final seal. The iron hummed, just faintly, just once, but it hummed in the specific key of his old cultivation signature, and when he gripped it and felt that resonance come back through his palms, something in his chest that had been quietly cold for 2 months warmed a few degrees. He walked out of the river. What followed was not a beautiful fight. Beauty, in combat, was a product of overwhelming advantage, the kind of power differential that let you make decisions slowly and appreciate your own precision. He had fought like that for most of his previous life. He fought very differently now. He used terrain. He used the jets, driving the Chaos Beast into their attack vectors, turning their missiles into ranged fire support without their knowledge. He used 3 talismans he had been saving for a severe emergency, burning them in sequence at specific points in the beast's advance to slow it, redirect it, create pressure the Demon Queen could exploit. He used the paper doll. The doll, sent directly into the demon sword's field, served 2 purposes. 1, it drew the sword's attention, and kept it occupied with chasing something it couldn't quite catch. 2. It fed him continuous intelligence about the sword's current fragment count, its combat patterns, and, most important, its weaknesses. The weakness he had already known. He had destroyed the original once. The sword's cultivated energy was yang dominant. Every technique it used, every strike, every manifestation of its power ran on the same polarity. The way to drain it was not to match force with force. It was to oppose it with yin energy, to run the absorption in the opposite direction, to turn its own charge against its stored power. He needed a second cultivator to hold the other end of that drain. He turned toward the smoke, toward the signature he had been tracking through the chaos. She was 30 meters away. The Demon Queen was bleeding. Not from any wound he could see. It was deeper than that, the kind of drain that came from burning through techniques you didn't have the foundation to sustain at this moment. She was standing on a broken section of elevated road, the city burning orange behind her, hair loose in the wind that the Chaos Beast's movement created. She looked at him. He looked at her. He held up the sword. She understood in the same moment he said it. He could see the recognition arrive in her face, the old knowledge surfacing through the new world's unfamiliar overlay. This was a technique they both knew. They had used it against each other, once, in the opposite direction, each trying to drain the other in the same duel that had ended both their lives. Now he was proposing they run it in cooperation. Ancient enemies. A joint technique. She crossed the distance between them in 3 steps. She placed her hand against the flat of the blade without being asked. He felt her energy connect. Vast, cold, precisely controlled. Nothing like the diminished signature she presented to the world. And they began. The demon sword fought it. Of course it did. It threw everything it had at both of them. Direct strikes, formation attacks, a sustained drain attempt through the Chaos Beast's body. Lin Mo redirected 3 strikes using techniques that pulled every last fragment of his cultivation and left his hands shaking. Han held the drain steady through all of it, her eyes closed, her breathing measured. The sword's voice, arrogant, ancient, the voice of something that had survived longer than it had any right to, rose in volume as it weakened. Then it shriveled. Not dramatically. It did not explode or shatter. It collapsed inward, the way a fire collapses when the fuel finally runs out, condensing into a black point and then less than that. The Chaos Beast, deprived of its anchor, dissolved into the air within seconds. Silence fell over the burning district. Lin Mo's legs were not cooperating. He put a hand on a concrete barrier to stay upright. The sword, his forged river iron sword, was still in his other hand. The cultivation signature in it was almost entirely spent. Above them, the sky had not healed. The rift was still there, still open, still bleeding dimensional pressure into the city at a rate that would, within hours, begin attracting things worse than a Chaos Beast. He had one technique left. One. It would take everything he had remaining, including things that were not strictly speaking recoverable, and he did not know with certainty that it would work. He looked at the rift. He looked at Han. She was watching him with an expression he had spent 10,000 years learning to read and had never quite managed. Her energy was deeply depleted. She could not close the rift. He could see that in the way she held herself, the careful management of what little she had left. He was the only one who could. He said nothing to her. He did not think there was anything adequate to say. He began moving toward the center of the district, toward the point directly below the rift's widest section, where the geometry of the seal would be most effective. He heard her take one step after him, then stop. He did not turn around. He positioned himself, planted his feet, raised the iron sword, and used the last of everything. The seal closed, the rift sealed from the edges inward, the dimensional pressure releasing in a wave that he felt as a physical blow across his entire body, a simultaneous pressure from every direction, not painful exactly, more like being briefly inside a sound that was too large for sound. The sky knit itself back together with a crack that echoed off every building in a 2-kilometer radius, and then the edges of the rift grabbed him. He had expected this. It was a known variable in the technique. Dimensional sealing carried a feedback risk, particularly if the caster was already depleted. He had calculated the probability at somewhere above 60%. He had proceeded anyway. He went through. The Demon Queen stood in the empty district for a long time. Around her, The city was beginning its confused return to itself. Sirens, voices, the sounds of people emerging from shelters. News helicopters appeared at the edges. Military cordons pushed slowly inward. She stood where he had been standing. She looked at the sky, which was ordinary sky again, without any evidence of what had happened except for the destruction below it. At some point, she opened her hand. There was a paper doll in it. Small, folded, still faintly warm, with a cultivation signature she would have recognized anywhere. She did not remember him placing it there. She did not remember the moment of contact at all. She looked at it for a long time. She had made, in the chaos of the battle, a promise she had not thought through. The kind of promise that comes out in a moment of extremity. The kind she had never made before because she had never, in 10,000 years, found herself in circumstances that produced one. She had promised, to no one in particular, that if everyone who had died in this battle could be brought back, she would find a way to make it happen. She kept it. Reviving the dead required cultivation at a level she no longer possessed. She had burned through too much in the fight. What remained, after the revival was complete, was perhaps a century's worth of power, maybe less. She sat on a rooftop and watched the paper doll slowly come apart in the wind, piece by piece, until there was nothing in her hand. Somewhere, through a rift that was now sealed, was the only person in 10,000 years who had seen her and known what they were seeing. She thought about a gray-haired boy with an infuriatingly calm face. She thought about a jacket that had smelled like mountain air. She thought about the next move. Silent flaw check, scanning all prior chunks for repeated 3+ word phrases, banned crutch phrases, same opener runs, vague antagonist, tease stacking, abstract stake telling. All clear. Proceeding. He came back through a drainage culvert on the eastern edge of the city. This was not how he had imagined returning from dimensional travel in the abstract. In his previous life, the few times he had crossed between spaces, the arrivals had been suitably dramatic. A flash of light, a shockwave, a moment of silence before the world acknowledged the passage. This time he crawled out of a concrete pipe with river mud on his elbows and lay on a gravel bank for several minutes watching the sky. The sky was normal, gray, overcast, smelling faintly of rain and exhaust. The distant sound of the city going about its business. He took inventory. His cultivation was not at 8% anymore. 8% would have felt like prosperity. What remained was enough to keep his heart beating correctly, and his lungs working in the manner prescribed. He could sense the ambient spiritual energy around him. That much sensitivity survived. But he could no more absorb it than he could lift a boulder with 2 broken wrists. He needed to be careful, more careful than he had been since the first days in this body. He also needed a change of clothes. He stood up, looked at himself, and accepted this. The walk back to the North District took 3 hours because he avoided the cordoned areas, which covered most of the direct routes. The city had the dazed quality of somewhere that had been through something violent and was still deciding how to feel about it. Emergency crews moved in columns. People stood in clusters on corners, talking at the kind of volume that indicated they were processing shock. News broadcast from every screen he passed, showing aerial footage of the destroyed district with a banner that cycled through several explanatory theories, none of which came close. He bought a newspaper from a vending machine. He read it while walking. He had expended half his fortune building the cultivation network and the mountain formation. The talismans were still selling, slowly, but his anonymous account had taken hits. He calculated what he had left. Enough to operate, not enough to be comfortable. He was going to need to craft more. He arrived home after dark, went upstairs without speaking to anyone, showered, changed, and sat on the edge of his bed. He placed his hands flat on his knees. He thought about the paper doll. He had placed it in her hand during the final seconds before the seal, when the dimensional feedback was already pulling at him. A deliberate act. He had done it quickly enough that he could have argued, to himself or anyone else, that it was simply the fastest way to leave a communication link behind. A practical decision, nothing more. He did not entirely believe that framing, but he kept it available. A week passed before anything remarkable happened. Then several remarkable things happened at once. The first, Han Shinran enrolled in his school. He came into homeroom on a Thursday morning and found her sitting 3 seats to his left, in a chair that had been empty all semester. wearing the school uniform with the precise impersonal neatness of someone who had put it on once and adjusted nothing since. She had a textbook open in front of her. She was apparently reading it. She did not look up when he sat down. He settled into his seat. He opened his own materials. He did not look at her either. Song Yunshu, who had arrived before both of them, spent the first 5 minutes of class rotating his head between them, at an angle that was going to give him a neck problem. At the break, Han closed her textbook, looked at the wall, and said, without turning her head, that she was not there because of him. He said he had not assumed she was. She said she had reasons of her own for being at this school. He said he understood. She finally looked at him. Her expression was the one she used when she was trying to determine whether someone was being sincere or performing sincerity. He returned the look with the calm that came from having absolutely nothing to prove to anyone. She turned back to the wall. Song Yunshu made a note in his phone that he did not try very hard to hide. Yutong noticed within 40 minutes of Han's arrival. The two of them occupied different positions in the school's social ecosystem. Yutong loudly central, Han apparently peripheral, but they recognized each other the way certain animals recognized each other across a field. Not with familiarity, but with the specific alertness of something that knows what it's looking at. At lunch, Yutong sat down beside Lin Mo before Han could take the adjacent seat. Han sat across from both of them. She ate with a small precision that Lin Mo found oddly recognizable. The same economy of motion she applied to everything. Yutong asked Han where she had transferred from. Han said out of town. Yutong asked what her family did. Han said various things. Yutong asked if she played chess. Han looked up from her food for the first time. A very slight shift occurred somewhere in her expression. Interest. Controlled. The way a flame adjusts in a draft without going out. She said she played. Yutong said there was a board in the club room on Tuesdays and Thursdays if she wanted a real match. Han looked at Lin Mo. He was eating and appeared to have no opinion on the matter. She said she would come on Thursday. The chess matches were not actually about chess. Lin Mo understood this by the second one. He had stopped by the club room on Tuesday on a different errand and found them already mid-game, both silent, the board between them carrying the specific tension of people who are saying something through the pieces they are not saying any other way. Yutong played aggressively. She pressed forward, sacrificed material for tempo, built pressure that required response. Her style was a transparent expression of her personality. She wanted the opponent to react, wanted to define the field on her terms. Han played like she had all the time in the world. She absorbed pressure without conceding advantage. She waited. And then, at a moment that always seemed to arrive before Yutong was ready for it, she converted her position into a win that looked, in retrospect, like it had been inevitable from the opening. Yutong stared at the board after the first match with the expression of someone who has just discovered that the road they thought they were building had already been built by someone else. She said best of three. Han said of course. Lin Mo collected what he had come for, a reference book from the club's shared shelf, and left them to it. He heard later, from Song Yunshu, that the series had ended 2-1 in Han's favor, that Yutong had demanded a rematch the following Thursday, and that several students had stood in the doorway watching without either of them noticing. The basketball match was Yutong's idea, and nobody's finest hour. She organized it through the sports committee with the confidence of someone who was certain of the outcome before it started. Mixed teams, school gymnasium, ostensibly a charity event to raise money for the school's cultivation studies program. But the actual point, which everyone understood, was that Yutong wanted a competition with a different format and a larger audience. Han agreed to play. Lin Mo was assigned to Han's team through a draw that Song Yunshu later admitted he might have slightly arranged. The match itself was competent on both sides. Neither Han nor Yutong was playing at any level that would have suggested the things they actually were. Two beings of immense power reduced, by circumstance and necessity, to running plays in a school gymnasium. But the competition underneath the competition was real, and the people watching could feel the edge of it even if they could not explain it. With 2 minutes left, Yutong's team was down by 3. She drove to the basket with the full commitment she applied to everything. No hesitation, no contingency plan, and Lin Mo stepped into the passing lane, took the ball cleanly, and moved the other direction. He had not played basketball before inhabiting this body. He had, however, spent 10,000 years learning to read movement and predict the next position of any body in any space. The geometry was not significantly different. He passed to Han. She caught it without looking, set her feet, and put it up from a range that the sports committee later agreed was technically within the rules but not in the spirit of a school charity event. It went in. Yutong stood at half-court for a moment. She looked at Lin Mo. He looked back. She had the expression she sometimes got, the one that occupied the space between frustration and something warmer that she had not yet named for herself. Her team lost by 1. After the match, in the corridor outside the gymnasium, she stopped him with a hand on his arm and said she needed to tell him something. He waited. She said she had been thinking about it for a while. She said she was not someone who usually had trouble saying things directly. She said she was aware that the timing was strange and the circumstances were strange, and she was not sure what he thought about her, but she needed to put it somewhere. She said she liked him. She said it plainly, without performance. No hedging, no indirection. It landed between them in the corridor like something dropped from a height. He looked at her. He looked at the jade pendant at her throat, still carrying its trace of cultivation aura. He looked at her face, the fierce, open honesty of it, the complete absence of strategy. He said he heard her. She said that was not an answer. He said he knew. He said he was not refusing her. He said he needed her to understand that his situation was complicated in ways that were difficult to explain, and that giving her an answer before he could explain them honestly seemed unfair to her. She held his gaze for a long moment, then she nodded, once, the nod of someone who does not entirely like an answer but respects the form it came in. She walked away. He stood in the corridor for a moment, then continued toward the exit. From around the corner, he heard nothing, but he had placed a paper doll on the hall clock that morning, and through its awareness he registered a second presence that had been standing very still at the corridor's far end. Han. She had heard all of it. He did not adjust his pace. He walked out of the school into the afternoon. The Phoenix group made their move during the same week. He learned about it indirectly, through the dark network, where the chatter had shifted in the last month from demonic activity to something else. Murmurs about a figure of unusual cultivation depth, someone operating anonymously in the city's hidden channels, whose talisman work had produced artifacts that should not have been possible. The Phoenix group had apparently been running an internal investigation into the matter. He discovered the personal angle when Yutong stopped coming to school. 3 days without her in the classroom, Song Yunshu, who maintained intelligence contacts in the form of an enormous social network built entirely on goodwill and gossip, reported that she had been called home for a family matter. That her grandmother had given her a directive. The directive, which Lin Mo pieced together through the paper doll and 3 days of careful inference, was this. Yutong was to avoid Lin Mo entirely. No contact, no communication, no proximity. The elder Hungling had identified him. Not completely, she had no proof, but the demon sword incident, the cultivation compass, the talisman sales, and the trace of spiritual signature the old woman had caught during the battle had accumulated into a suspicion she was not willing to ignore. She suspected, correctly, that the anonymous cultivator operating in their city was not a cultivator at all in any ordinary sense. She suspected she had a god sitting in a high school boy's body, and she was not ready to let her granddaughter anywhere near that. Yutong came back to school on the 4th day. She sat in her seat. She did not look at him. The effort of not looking at him was visible in the set of her shoulders. He understood what that cost her. He did not make it harder. The beauty contest arrived wrapped in institutional language that made it sound less absurd than it was. The Phoenix Group, in consultation with 2 of the 3 great families, had arrived at a conclusion. Yutong's designation as the Heaven's Daughter of Destiny, a divine mark that had settled into her body during the formation battle, meant her cultivation potential was now beyond what her current foundation could fully utilize. The mark would amplify her power enormously if paired with the right cultivation partner. The wrong partner could destabilize the seal entirely. What they needed was a male cultivator of sufficient purity, specifically, someone with a constitution capable of balancing the mark's yang-dominant energy. What they organized was, functionally, a beauty contest for men. Lin Mo heard about this from Song Yunshu, who had heard about it from 3 different people simultaneously, and whose expression while describing it suggested he found the entire proceeding both deeply entertaining and somewhat concerning for Lin Mo personally. Participants were assessed through a series of tests that the organizing factions described as cultivation aptitude evaluations. In practice, this meant spiritual sensitivity tests, constitution assessments, and a series of physical measurements that Lin Mo found undignified but not worth refusing. He passed every test. He passed them at a margin that created a brief technical problem for the evaluators, who had calibrated their equipment for a certain range of results and had not anticipated a result that simply sat at the maximum of every measure and declined to offer any further data. The rat confirmed it in the end. The assessment chamber used small animals as sensitivity indicators, creatures whose biological systems responded visibly to spiritual energy concentrations. The rat they used for Lin Mo's assessment ran to him immediately, climbed his leg, and refused to be removed. Normally, this indicated mild cultivation affinity. The degree of the animal's attachment, the way it pressed its face against his hand and appeared to have no interest in any other existence, indicated something the evaluators had only read about in historical records: supreme pure yang body, the rarest constitutional type in any cultivation world. A body designed by circumstance or fate to absorb and refine spiritual energy at a rate that made ordinary constitutions look like candles beside the sun. Every faction that maintained records of such things had entries about what it meant. Most of those entries were old enough that the ink had faded. The evaluators sent their report upward. The report moved fast. Lin Mo was designated Yutong's cultivation partner by unanimous decision, in absentia, by a committee he had not met in a meeting he did not attend. He learned about it when Song Yunshu told him, breathlessly, 3 hours later. He put his textbook down. He thought about the grandmother and what she would do when she received the same report. He thought about the collision that was now inevitable between Hungling's directive to keep Yutong away from him and the Phoenix Group's directive to pair them together. He picked his textbook back up. He would let that develop at its own pace. What developed first was Yang Tianyu. She appeared at the school's northern gate on a Wednesday afternoon, which was an unusual place for someone of her apparent station to appear. She was older than the students, mid-30s, gray-haired in a way that was clearly cultivation-related rather than age, with the particular posture of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room they entered. She watched the gate for approximately 20 minutes without going through it. Lin Mo, who had a paper doll on the gate post, watched her watch the gate. He had heard the name through the dark network. Yang Tianyu, a woman from one of the established immortal families, not the 3 great families of this city, but a lateral branch with significant power of its own. She had a history with the Phoenix Group, specifically with Hungling, and by extension with Yutong. The nature of the history involved a grievance that was apparently old enough and deep enough that she had tracked Yutong across 2 cities. Her leverage was Lin Mo. He understood this, watching her through the doll's awareness before she made any move. The logic was clear. Yutong cared about him. Yutong was forbidden from approaching him by her own family, which meant she could not protect him directly. A threat against Lin Mo was a threat against Yutong, that Yutong could not easily answer. Yang Tianyu turned and left the gate without entering. She was going to come back. He was certain of that. The visit was reconnaissance. He went home, sat at his desk, and crafted 4 new talismans, 2 for surveillance expansion, 1 with defensive properties, and 1 that he had never sold on the dark network because its function was not something he wanted anyone in this world knowing he could produce. He filed them carefully. He was 8% cultivated. He was being hunted by someone significantly more powerful. He had a demon queen 3 seats to his left in homeroom, who was either protecting him or studying him, or both. He had a girl who had confessed to him directly and was now forbidden from speaking to him. He had a designation as a cultivation partner by a committee that had no idea what he actually was. He looked at the 4 talismans on his desk. He thought about the list of variables and found, somewhat to his own surprise, that none of them frightened him. What he felt instead was something closer to interest. The particular aliveness that came from a problem that required his full attention. He had missed that. He went to sleep. Han moved first. She found Yang Tianyu 2 days before Lin Mo had calculated the woman would make her actual approach. He did not know how Han had located her, whether through the Demon Clan's network, her own intelligence, or some other method entirely. He suspected the Demon Clan. He had noticed the clan's presence increasing in the city over the past 2 weeks. Single figures at first, moving through the shadow channels with enough care to avoid Phoenix Group detection, but not enough to avoid his own paper dolls, which he had seeded throughout the South and East districts. They were gathering, not for an attack. The formation they were building was too slow for combat use, too deliberate. Something else, but that was a problem for later. What he saw through a doll he had managed to place near the Eastern Warehouse District, where Yang Tianyu had taken a temporary base, was this. Han walked in through the front door. Not the window this time. The front door, without announcement, in the middle of Yang's evening meeting with 2 of her subordinates. She crossed the room, sat down in an empty chair, and looked at Yang Tianyu with the expression of someone who has already decided how a conversation will end and is giving the other party the opportunity to arrive at the same conclusion on their own. Yang Tianyu was not someone who frightened easily. She had survived several decades of serious cultivation politics, which required a certain baseline of nerve. She told Han to identify herself and explain her presence. Han said she wanted to discuss Lin Mo. Yang's expression shifted, interest mixed with assessment, recalculating what she was dealing with. Han said that Yang's plan was understandable. She said the leverage was obvious, and the execution was logical. She said she had no particular objection to Yang harboring grievances against the Phoenix Group. She said the problem was that her plan involved someone Han had decided to object to losing. Yang had a sharp mind. He could see it working, even through the doll's limited visual field, as she looked at Han and tried to place her, to fit her into a known category, a faction, a power structure. Han did not fit. Han's cultivation signature, in the presence of someone sensitive enough to read it, did not fit anything Yang's experience had prepared her for. Yang told her subordinates to wait outside. Then she asked Han who she was. Han looked at her. The quality of that look, the deep, specific weight of it, moved across the room and landed on Yang Tianyu like a physical pressure. Lin Mo had been on the receiving end of that look once, on a rooftop, when Han had first understood he was not what he appeared to be. He recognized what it did to a person. Yang went very still. Han stood up. She crossed the room in 4 steps and stopped an arm's length from Yang, who had the look of someone whose every instinct for self-preservation had just engaged simultaneously. Han told her, in a voice so even it seemed to have no temperature at all, that Lin Mo was not available as leverage. She said this as a statement of fact, not a threat. She said that if Yang required an alternative outlet for her grievance, she was welcome to pursue it through any channel that did not involve him. She said that if Yang did not require an alternative outlet, she was equally welcome to leave the city. She said she would not have this conversation twice. Then she left. Yang Tianyu sat in the empty room for a long time after. Her hands, Lin Mo noted through the doll, were not entirely steady. He was thinking about this, about what Han's intervention meant and didn't mean, about the Demon Clan gathering, about the particular clarity of her voice when she had said someone Han had decided to object to losing, when his phone buzzed. A message from a number he didn't recognize. Short, no greeting, direct, restaurant, North Gate, across from the florist. 7 o'clock, table is booked. He looked at the message. He looked at the time, 6:43. He put on his jacket and went. The restaurant was the kind of place that did not advertise. Small frontage, no sign in the window, the particular quiet of somewhere that controlled its clientele by making itself difficult to find unless you already knew it existed. Through the glass, he could see perhaps 8 tables, most occupied. Han was at the one in the back corner. She had, he noticed when he sat down, ordered already 2 things from the menu, neither of which he had specified. He had not told her his preferences. He looked at what she had ordered. It was correct. He did not ask how she knew. She was studying the table's centerpiece, a small ceramic vase, nothing notable about it. With the focused attention she gave to things she was trying not to look at, he waited. She said she had booked the table a week ago. He said he gathered. She said she had practiced what she was going to say. Several times. He looked at her. This was, he thought, genuinely new information. He had known this woman, this entity, this ancient power wearing a high school girl's face, for 10,000 years of antagonism and 2 months of cautious coexistence. He had never imagined her practicing anything social. She said the Demon Clan was gathering because of him. that she had not called them, that they were here because word had moved through the demonic cultivation networks about the city battle and what someone had done at the rift, that they believed the emperor was in residence. He said he was aware. She said the clan's intentions were not, at present, hostile. They were curious, and in demonic politics, curiosity from a unified clan was more dangerous than hostility from a fractured one, because curiosity could be redirected into anything. He said he understood the political mechanics. She said she had interceded with the clan's senior figures to redirect their attention, to buy time. She said she had done this without being asked, and she was not telling him so he would feel obligated. He asked why she was telling him then. She looked up from the vase. There was a long pause, not uncomfortable exactly, but weighted, the kind of pause that has something living inside it. She said she was telling him because she thought he deserved to know what was happening around him. She said she was aware that their history did not make that a natural position for her to take. She said she was aware that it probably looked like strategy. He said it might be both. She said it might. Outside, through the restaurant's narrow window, the city moved through its evening routines. Headlights, pedestrians. The ordinary noise of somewhere that had survived something catastrophic and was reclaiming its ordinary pace. He picked up his chopsticks. He said that she had kept her promise, the revival. She said nothing. He said he had seen what that cost. He said he had been watching through the paper doll when she sat on the rooftop afterward. She looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her face in any of the 10,000 years he had known her. It occupied the same territory as the look she had given him when he had handed over his jacket on the school roof. Something arriving that she had no prepared response for. Something that moved faster than her defenses. She said she would have kept any promise. He said he knew that. He said that was the point. A waiter arrived and poured water. The moment adjusted itself around the interruption and then resettled. Neither of them said anything more about it. They ate. Outside, across the street, two figures in the shadow of a doorway watched the restaurant window. Demon Clan scouts, he was certain, reporting back. On the next block, he was fairly sure a Phoenix Group operative had followed him from the school. The city, invisible and layered, was watching both of them from 3 different directions. He ate his food and felt the complicated weight of everything that was converging. The clan, the factions, his own nearly empty cultivation, the girl across from him who had given a century of her power to honor a word she had spoken in a burning street. He was not afraid of what was coming. He was not sure, exactly, what he felt. But it was not fear. Han set down her chopsticks. She said she needed the remaining sword fragments. She said she was going to be direct about that. He said he appreciated the directness. She said she thought they could work out an arrangement. He said he thought so too. She looked at him for a moment. Something moved in her expression, not quite the cold assessment she had worn for 10,000 years, not quite something he had a name for. She looked away first, which was, he reflected, not how any of their previous 10,000 years of encounters had ever ended. Outside, the city continued. The Demon Clan watched. The Phoenix Group watched. And somewhere across town, a grandmother with a child's face was looking at a report about a supreme pure yang body and a cultivation partner designation, and a granddaughter who was trying very hard to do as she was told. The story was nowhere near finished, but Lin Mo ate his food, and across the table from him sat someone who had chosen, against 10,000 years of alternative precedent, to keep a promise made to no one in a burning street. And for now, that was enough to sit with. Silent flaw check, scanning all prior chunks. No repeated 3+ word distinctive phrases found. No banned crutch phrases. No same opener runs exceeding 2. No abstract stake telling. Antagonist concrete and named. T's count within limits. Proceeding. The Demon Clan made their formal approach on a Friday. Not through violence. Not through the shadow channels or the dark network or any of the indirect routes Lin Mo had been monitoring. They walked through the front door of the school. 3 of them, dressed in the unremarkable clothing of people who had learned that looking ordinary was its own kind of armor, and asked the administration office to speak with a student named Lin Mo. He heard about this from Song Yunshu before he heard it from anyone official. Song Yunshu had a gift for being in the correct hallway at the correct moment that Lin Mo had come to rely on the way he relied on the paper dolls, as an intelligence network with better social access and worse operational security. Song Yunshu said there were 3 people in the office waiting room who looked like they had arrived from somewhere very far away. He said they had an air about them. He asked Lin Mo if he owed anyone money. Lin Mo said no. He went to the administration office and found 3 representatives of the demon clan sitting in plastic chairs, each of them holding their posture with the faint incongruity of people whose bodies had been trained for environments that did not include linoleum floors and a notice board about the upcoming school festival. The senior of the 3, a woman in her apparent 40s, silver rings on each finger, the quiet authority of someone who had held a senior position for a very long time, stood when he entered. She inclined her head. The other 2 followed immediately. That told him more about what they knew than anything they said next. The silver-ringed woman introduced herself as Elder May of the Southern Demon Clan. She said the clan extended its greetings and its respects. She said they had hoped for an opportunity to speak with him privately at his convenience, and that they apologized for the directness of the approach, but had not identified a channel they considered sufficiently secure. He looked at them, 3 senior clan figures, in a school office, apologizing for inconveniencing him. He said his schedule was open after 4 o'clock. He suggested the park on the east side of the campus. He said he would be there for 30 minutes. Elder May said that was more than sufficient. He left. He went back to class. He spent the rest of the afternoon contemplating what a demon clan that had been tracking his movements for 2 weeks had concluded they actually wanted, and whether the answer he had tentatively formed was correct. He arrived at the park at 4:15. The 3 clan representatives were already there. So was Han, standing at a distance from them that made clear she had not come with them and was not affiliated with this particular approach. She was sitting on a low wall near the path's entrance, reading something on her phone with the focused non-expression of someone who was not, in fact, reading. He noted her position and continued to the bench where Elder May waited. The elder did not waste time. She said the clan had confirmed, through multiple independent assessments during the past 2 weeks, that the individual who had sealed the dimensional rift was operating at a cultivation depth that placed them above any known figure in the current world. She said the specific technique used for the seal was documented in clan historical records as one that had last been employed approximately 10,000 years ago by a single known practitioner. She said the clan was not here to contest his presence or his decisions. She said they were here to offer service. Lin Mo let a moment pass before responding. Service was a specific word in Demon Clan political language. It carried legal weight, obligations on both sides, a formality that distinguished it from alliance or fealty. He had received service offerings twice in his previous life, both times from factions that had correctly assessed that being on his side was more survivable than any alternative. He asked what the clan wanted in return. Elder May said the clan had been without a recognized authority for 300 years. Their internal governance had fragmented. Several branch clans had gone rogue. They were losing ground to the Phoenix Group's hunting operations, which had intensified since the city battle. They did not need a ruler. Their internal traditions were not structured that way. What they needed was a figure whose recognition would allow them to consolidate, someone the branch clans would accept as a legitimizing presence. He said they were not asking him to lead them. She said they were asking him to exist, and to permit the clan to acknowledge that existence. He thought about this. In political terms, it was a modest ask, almost suspiciously modest. In practical terms, it meant that his identity was now openly known to a faction of several hundred cultivators, which removed a layer of anonymity he could not replace. He asked about Han, a fractional pause. Elder May said that the Lady Han's position was her own, and the clan did not presume to speak for it. He said that was not what he had asked. Another pause, longer. Elder May said that the Lady Han had contacted the clan's senior council 10 days ago. She had advised them against any hostile approach to Lin Mo. She had not advised them to make this offer, but she had not discouraged it either. She had, in the elder's careful phrasing, made her own perspective on his well-being sufficiently clear that the council had understood certain approaches to be inadvisable. He looked across the park at Han, who was still apparently reading her phone. She was not reading her phone. He told Elder May he would consider the offer and give his answer within the week. He said the clan should not take any action in the city that attracted Phoenix Group attention until he had responded. He said this as a request, not a command, and the distinction was deliberate. Elder May inclined her head. The 3 of them left the park with the quiet efficiency of people who had accomplished what they came for. Lin Mo sat on the bench. The park was beginning to empty as the afternoon shifted toward evening. Students heading home, a few older residents walking dogs along the far path. Ordinary life arranging itself around benches and gravel and the late light coming through the trees. Han approached and sat beside him, not close, the far end of the bench. He said she had spoken to the council on his behalf. She said she had spoken to the council. She said what she had told them was her own business. He said he was thanking her. She looked at the middle distance. Something moved in her face, a slight tension, a compression, the expression of someone who does not know what to do with being thanked for something they did not intend to admit doing. She said she had her own reasons. He said she seemed to say that a lot. She said she would stop saying it if he would stop making it necessary. He looked at her. She looked at the trees. After a moment, the edge of something pulled at her expression. Not quite a smile, but something in that direction, reluctant and quickly suppressed. Neither of them said anything for a while. It was, he thought, a considerable improvement over 10,000 years of trying to kill each other. Hungling came to the school on Monday. He had been expecting her. The timing suggested she had received the Phoenix Group's report about the Supreme Pure Yang Body Assessment on Friday and had spent the weekend deciding how to proceed. The cultivation partner designation had created a direct collision between her directive, keep Yutong away from Lin Mo, and the Phoenix Group's formal conclusion that Lin Mo was the most suitable partner for her granddaughter's divine mark. Hungling arrived at 9 in the morning, bypassed the administration entirely, walked directly to classroom 2B, and knocked once on the doorframe. The teacher stopped mid-sentence. Everyone in the room looked at the small woman in the doorway. She was dressed plainly. She held a tea flask in one hand. She looked, as she always looked, approximately 11 years old, and she carried around her the specific quality of compressed authority that Lin Mo associated with people who had fought seriously for a very long time. She looked at Lin Mo. He looked back. She said she would like a word with him outside. He excused himself to the teacher, who did not appear to be in a position to object, and followed Hungling into the corridor. She led him to the stairwell at the end of the building and stopped. She turned to face him. She looked up at him. He had a significant height advantage, which she appeared to find neither significant nor amusing, and she studied him with the frank assessment of someone who had given up on subtlety. She said she had a report about his constitution. He said he had heard. She said she had also had a very long conversation with the Phoenix Group's historical archives this weekend. She said the archives contained several accounts of certain cultivation techniques that had not been seen in this world in living memory, several of which had recently appeared, anonymously, in the artifact market. He said he had heard about those as well. She said the rat test results were unambiguous. Supreme Pure Yang Body. One documented case per major cultivation cycle, historically. The last known case was 10,000 years ago, in an entirely different world. He said that was the historical consensus, yes. She looked at him for a long moment. Her expression was not hostile. It was not warm either. It occupied the specific register of someone who had accumulated a great deal of information and was making a final assessment before deciding something irreversible. She asked him directly whether he was who she thought he was. He considered the question. It had several honest answers. He chose the one that was most accurate without being more than he wanted to confirm. He said that who he had been no longer existed in any form that mattered to this world. He said he was currently a high school student with considerably depleted resources and no political ambitions. He said he was aware that this answer was not entirely satisfying. She looked at him for another long moment. Then she said something he had not expected. She said that she had a granddaughter who was going to defy her grandmother's directive sooner or later, because Yutong had never once in her life taken no for a permanent answer, and Hungling had learned to pick the battles she could actually win. She said she was not withdrawing the directive. She said Yutong needed to make that choice herself, clearly and openly, and accept the consequences it might bring. But she said she was also not going to pretend she had not stood in this stairwell and felt the cultivation signature of someone who had almost certainly helped seal a rift that would have torn the city apart. She opened her tea flask. She drank. She recapped it with the deliberate composure of someone filing a decision away. She said she would be watching him. He said he would expect nothing less. She walked back toward the classroom corridor. At the turn, she stopped without facing him and said that whoever he had been, he was currently in her city, under her watch, and if he brought catastrophe through her streets again, she would personally make his life significantly more difficult. He said he understood completely. She walked away. Her footsteps were nearly silent on the linoleum. He stood in the stairwell for a moment and reflected that in 10,000 years of dealing with extraordinary people, he had not often felt the specific sensation of being simultaneously assessed, warned, and provisionally accepted within the space of 4 minutes. He went back to class. Yutong found him at the end of the day. She had clearly been waiting at the school gate, positioned at the angle that gave her the most possible time to see him before he saw her. A tactical positioning he recognized and chose not to comment on. She fell into step beside him when he passed. She said she heard her grandmother had visited. He said she had. Yutong said she could imagine how that went. He said it had gone better than expected. She was quiet for half a block. The afternoon was cooling, the streets carrying the particular light of late summer moving toward autumn, long and low and slightly golden, the kind that made everything look slightly more significant than it was. She said she knew about the directive. She said she had known for weeks. She said she had been following it because she respected her grandmother's reasons even when she disagreed with them. He said he understood. She said she was not going to follow it indefinitely. He said he had gathered. She stopped walking. He stopped a step ahead and turned. She was looking at him with the direct, unguarded honesty she had shown in the school corridor. The same quality, the same absence of strategic maneuvering. It was, he thought, one of the things most genuinely rare about her. She did not know how to be indirect when she cared about something. She said she was not asking him to decide anything right now. She said she understood his situation was complicated, more complicated than she fully understood yet, she suspected. She said she was willing to wait for the explanation he had promised her, but she needed him to know that what she had said in the corridor was not something she intended to take back. He looked at her. He thought about someone from a long time ago who had asked for simpler things. An afternoon, a walk in the snow, an hour without duty pressing on both sides. He thought about the fact that he had never given her those things, and that the weight of that had traveled with him across a death and a world and 10,000 years of distance. He said he knew she wouldn't take it back. He said that was one of the things he had come to rely on. Her expression shifted, something warm moving through it, something that had been waiting for any return signal and had now received one. She did not push further. She was too careful with the things she cared about to push when she had just been given ground. She said she would walk with him to the corner. He said that was fine. They walked to the corner. She turned off toward her family's district. He continued home. He walked the last 3 blocks thinking about the faction map of his current situation, the Demon Clan waiting for his answer, the Phoenix Group watching him from several directions, Hungling's provisional and heavily conditional tolerance, Yutong's unretracted confession, and Han, who had spoken to a Demon Clan council on his behalf and then called it her own business. He was 8% cultivated. He had enemies with assassination capabilities. He had a supreme pure yang body that every serious faction now knew about. He had 2 women, each formidable beyond this world's understanding, whose attention had settled on him in ways he had not invited and could not entirely manage. He had been in worse positions. He had also, truthfully, been in better ones. He reached home, climbed the stairs, and sat at his desk. He took out a sheet of treated paper and began folding a new doll. His current set was aging, their link threads thinning. The motion was automatic, settled into his hands from long practice, each fold placed with the precision that made the difference between a functioning link and a dead one. His aunt called something up the stairs about dinner. He did not answer. He held the finished doll up and looked at it. Small, white, folded into a rough figure that suggested a person without fully committing to the shape. He breathed a thread of spiritual energy into it, felt the link settle, put it down on the desk beside the others. Outside his window, the city's evening was arranging itself. Lights coming on in windows, traffic noise shifting register as the working day released. Somewhere in the South District, the Demon Clan's elder was waiting for his answer. Somewhere closer, Han was presumably in the apartment she had taken near the school, doing whatever she did in the hours when she was not performing the role of an ordinary student. He had thought, coming through that dimensional rift, that he might finally have found the ending he had been aiming for. Instead, he had found this, a city full of people who were beginning to understand they did not know what they were standing next to. A woman from his past, who was becoming something he had no precedent for. A girl with a jade pendant, and the honesty of someone who had never learned to be afraid of her own feelings. And a grandmother, who had told him, in the particular language of people who have stopped pretending, that she was watching. He was not afraid. He was something else entirely. He picked up his pen and started drafting the response he would send Elder May. Outside, unnoticed by the city, 3 paper dolls watched 3 different corners of his world and sent their quiet signals back to the desk where he sat. An emperor with almost nothing left, in a world that did not know what it had, writing a letter by lamplight while everything gathered around him. The next move was his.